The Incredibles is one of the crown jewels of the Pixar franchise, and for good reason. The film has a lot going for it, from likable protagonists to a diabolical villain embedded in an entertaining story used to flesh out certain themes. The first of which is that of conformity to the norms dictated by society, and the character most involved in this theme is our main protagonist, Mr. Incredible. Not long into the film, superheroes are outlawed and forced to integrate with the rest of the civilian population. For Bob, he is barely surviving on a thread in terms of his mental health. Life is miserable for him, being forced to work an unfulfilling job while he can only reminisce on better days in the past. The film makes use of some visual imagery to communicate this misery, utilizing the concept of size. Bob is too large of a man to fit into both his car and his cubicle, which implies that his current lifestyle is not a fulfilling one. The nearby sign bearing the label of high voltage is rather apt, implying that Bob is in a volatile state, ready to implode. The epitome of this misery comes in the form of his overbearing boss, Mr. Huff, a short, puny man who can exert power over the colossal Bob, the contrast of which is certainly not lost on the viewing audience. Mr. Huff represents the notion of capitalistic greed in his prioritization of the shareholders' profit instead of the well-being of his customers. He also depicts the notion of oppressive control, as exemplified by his OCD of arranging his pencils onto his calendar, and by his speech where he compares his employees to the parts of a clock. More likely than not, Mr. Huff was referencing the term a cog in a machine, an idiom which communicates that someone is insignificant in terms of the larger scope of the organization. Interestingly, Mr. Huff has 4 clocks on the wall, all of which tell the same time. Normally, clocks of this kind would be used to tell the time for another office in another time zone, so perhaps the company is looking to expand to other regions. So either Mr. Huff is rather overzealous regarding his company's expansion, which is odd for a middle manager, or maybe he just favors his clock metaphor a bit too much. For Bob, all of this culminates in the real-world implication that conformity equals misery, and his civilian life is a testament to that. For most of us, we're somewhat in the same boat as Bob, following the standard cookie-cutter plan that society has of us. Finish school, get a stable job, buy a house and car, get married, have kids, and hopefully one day retire with enough savings. And while it's the so-called standard way of living, perhaps just like with Bob, it's extremely unfulfilling and draining of every last vestige of joy. The character of Violet also extends on this theme of conformity equaling misery. For most of the film, she wants to fit in and act quote-unquote normal. But by suppressing the more candid aspects of her personality, she suffers from low self-esteem and is poetically invisible, so to speak, in terms of her social life. Only at the end, after embracing her whole self, did she exude a magnetic charisma that was unlike her previous self. Next, we have the theme of being special. Nonconformity might be a good thing, but it also needs to be moderated with some humility. Dash makes this point when he retorts to his mom that saying that everyone's special is another way of saying that no one is. Syndrome touches on this theme too in his endgame plan, saying that when everyone's super, no one will be. Perhaps this is an indirect jab at the Hollywood cliché of being the chosen one that was prevalent in characters from Star Wars and The Matrix, characters who were put on a pedestal for being destined to save their respective worlds. The Incredibles was released in 2004, around the same time as these other movies. From a real-world perspective, no one is really that special, and the only people that you are special to are the ones who cherish your existence. In the world of The Incredibles, however, there are indeed special beings with special gifts, and this brings us to the next theme of the glory days, or being stuck in the past. Mr. Incredible is the obvious representation of this theme in that he misses out on his family life due to being absorbed with the past. Other characters also experience this, namely the superheroes that were killed by Syndrome. Chances are that more than likely, a large chunk of them are also sentimental of the past, and for good reason. If you were a gifted individual with a talent for, let's say, singing, the most unfulfilling thing that could happen to you would be the state of having to hide your true potential and live as if you never had those abilities, so it's rather understandable that they were reminiscing about the good old days. Again, this ties back to the theme of conformity in the sense that sometimes in the process of fitting in, we lose ourselves and the abilities that come more naturally to us than others. But to return to the concept of family, it's undoubtedly another key theme in The Incredibles. The Incredibles family could only defeat Syndrome when they worked as a team despite the marital problems and the sibling rivalry, and along the way, we see the synergistic effect of their powers, such as when Dash and Violet combined abilities to create a super-speed force field. Moving on, we come to the theme of fake heroism, and this is carried by the antagonist, Syndrome. Due to his narcissistic disorder, or as others have pointed out, his mental illness of main character syndrome, Buddy desires to exalt himself as a hero to the public. His labeling of his endgame as Operation Kronos is an expression of his self-image. Just like in Greek mythology, Kronos was the leader of the Titans who overthrew his father, so Syndrome desires to be the leader, in the sense of becoming the greatest superhero and surpassing the fame of Mr. Incredible, a figure he used to worship. I suppose that in ancient times, the figureheads of Greek mythos were the superheroes of their day, a notion hinted at by the Greek figures plastered on Edna's wall that we see here. Syndrome is perhaps a representation of the fake heroes that we hold in high regard in real life, like those who give to charity for the sake of a tax write-off, or perhaps as a way to garner public approval while the charitable funds simply go from their left pocket to the right pocket out of creative accounting techniques. At the same time, Syndrome is also a cautionary tale on the dangers of intelligence combined with wayward morals. If either trait was missing, Syndrome would hardly be regarded as one of Pixar's most evil villains. And if Syndrome is the fake hero, then Mr. Incredible is the true hero, one who, as Syndrome put it, had nothing to lose, but still retained his morality in preserving human life. With Syndrome's attack on the city, another truth becomes evident. The public that once campaigned against superheroes now readily accepts a new hero as their savior. So it must be that there were no threats at the time when superheroes were banished. A sad truth that often our usefulness to others determines our worth to them, and once that usefulness has run its course, the appreciation turns to rejection. But to bring this to a close, The Incredibles as a film offers many themes that resonate with us in the real world, chief of which is the dullness and the drudgery of conformity, and the appeal to us to embrace our gifts and what makes our lives meaningful.